Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 5 of the Sharks-Avalanche series, in which the Sharks won 2-1. So now the Sharks have the 3-2 series lead going back to Denver, trying to eliminate the Avalanche in 6 games. If not, they will at the very least be back at home for a potential Game 7. But the Sharks have the Avalanche on the ropes, and this is exactly what they were hoping for at the end of this game. And the Sharks got right back on track from where they sort of fell off a bit back in Game 4. They were at least slightly the better team, I felt, for both Games 1, 2, and 3. Tonight was no different. The Sharks heavily outshot the Avalanche. The Sharks I felt, maybe not heavily outchanced, but definitely got a lot of good chances. Philipp Grubauer, in particular, he let in 2 goals tonight compared to the 0 in Game 4, and yet I felt as though Grubauer was much better tonight than he had to be, I should say, back in Game 4. He made multiple key saves to keep the Sharks off the board early and allow the Avalanche to stay alive. Technically, the Sharks did score first in this game. That was Kevin Labanc, but it was called off as Timo Meier ended up taking a high sticking penalty, basically like half a second before this puck went in. And it was a similar situation to Game 2 against the Golden Knights, where Couture took that goal interference penalty before the puck went in and everything like that. That one I had a problem with because the goalie interference penalty was not a penalty. Here tonight, upon further review into the video, you can maybe make the argument that it isn't the high sticking. Maybe you could even say almost definitively that it shouldn't have been high sticking, but at real time, I could definitely see why you would think it is a high sticking call, so I don't have a huge problem with it. I was surprised that they even bothered to review it. I don't know what they could have possibly reviewed there, and it's sort of weird that they would review that, but they couldn't review the Couture one. This shouldn't have been reviewed either. They should have just called it no goal. It was a tough call for the Sharks, but it was technically correct because it was, at least at first glance, a penalty compared to the Couture one back in Game 2 against the Knights, where it was pretty clearly, even at real time, not a penalty. And so it was the Avalanche who got the first goal in this game. That ended up coming in the second period. While the Sharks were getting so many good opportunities, but Grubauer was there time and time again, the Avalanche get a pretty lucky one off of Tyson Jost, his first career playoff goal, if I'm not mistaken. So nice that little thing still appears here in the playoffs for the San Jose Sharks. And it looked like they might trail at the end of the second period 1-0, which wouldn't be that great for the Sharks' confidence, seeing as they were shut out in the previous game as well. But the Sharks get a late power play, and their power play up to that point had been pretty good. Their first power play of that game was quite solid, just didn't get the goal. The second power play was decent, and then this third power play finally converts, and it's Tomas Hertl's first goal of this series. That would be his 7th on these playoffs. And so the Sharks ended up with a 1-1 game going into the third period, which of course was huge for their confidence. And at the start of the third period, they came out, they continued to fly. They end up getting the go-ahead goal again from Tomas Hertl on a beautiful shift from all of the 5 players on the ice for the Sharks, and they managed to hold that lead against the Avalanche for the rest of the game. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones, and I did, of course, mention that the Sharks pretty heavily outshot the Avalanche, something like 39-22, if I'm not mistaken, so a 17-shot difference is pretty large, but that does not mean that Jones didn't have much to do in this game, because the Avalanche, with only 22 shots, a lot of those were actually very good opportunities. They probably had similar high-danger scoring chances than the Sharks had in this game, even if the Sharks may have had better medium scoring chances and everything like that. So Jones had to be sharp, and he was. He continues to be on fire here for the Sharks. I said last game might have been his best of this series. This might now take that new title, as it was just a spectacular game all around. The only one that beats him seems to be a theme now in the past couple of games was a pretty lucky bounce here for the Avalanche. So otherwise, everything Martin Jones is seeing, everything he's barely able to see, anytime that there's a defensive breakdown, somehow Jones has managed to be able to get in front of this one. Maybe Jost even deserves this goal after he got completely robbed by Martin Jones, if I'm not mistaken, just a couple minutes earlier on like a good pass across from the Avalanche player. I think it was Tyson Jost, if I'm not mistaken. And so Jones has just been so spectacular, and this is one of the more underrated storylines I find of the Stanley Cup playoffs thus far. So many people talking about how, all the wild cards are doing so well. Columbus sweeping Tampa, Carolina now onto the Eastern Conference Finals, Dallas doing so well, St. Louis coming from bottom of the league to now be in the second round and everything like that. But Martin Jones's recovery from those pretty bad first 4 games of the series against Golden Knights, plus a pretty below average regular season for him, to now put up 8 straight games in which he has just not even just been good, but he has been very good. I think he's led in 2 or less in most of them. Game 7 against the Golden Knights stands out as one, and I think Game 2 against the Colorado Avalanche is another. And so 6 of the 8 games the Sharks have played in this series, or in these playoffs, since that Game 4 against the Golden Knights, Jones has led in 2 or less, which of course, as we know for the Sharks, is sort of the key to victory. And so he's just been such a huge part. People talking about Couture, Burns, Carlson, Hertl, but Martin Jones has honestly been maybe a dark horse for the MVP right now for the San Jose Sharks. I don't know if they're even in the second round without his stellar performances from Game 5 to Game 7 against the Golden Knights. And if, they're in as good of a position as they are now, up 3-2, without Jones's solid performances through these first 5 games. Next is Donskoy, who made a return to the lineup, thankfully, as he replaced Lukáš Radil, and we saw the good and the bad with Jonas Donskoy. The bad being that Radil was a bigger-bodied player. He could get more into the forecheck, and so there was a better cycle, honestly enough, when Kane, Hertl, and Radil were in it. However, we also saw the good of Jonas Donskoy is that he can actually finish a play, or at least continue a play in more of a dangerous situation compared to Lukáš Radil, who's, I guess doesn't really have the skill to be able to do that, and we saw that actually on the go-ahead goal for the Sharks. Tomáš Hertl's Donskoy making a pretty solid play there. I mean, everyone on the ice for the Sharks at that moment was playing very, very well on that shift that led to the Hertl goal, but Donskoy played a good part, and I don't know if Radil would have been able to do that, and so a solid game for Donskoy in his first game back. I was going to point out that I haven't seen a player fall as much as Jonas Donskoy did in this game. He just continuously fell down, but Mikko Rantanen of the Avalanche probably gave him a good run for his money after Rantanen fell down multiple times in this game as well. So it seems like to be a competition between those two players, but hopefully Donskoy finds, a steadier feet as we go to Game 6. Next is Joakim Ryan, a player who probably many wouldn't expect me to talk about, and I wasn't really expecting me to talk about, but I've actually been rather impressed with Joakim Ryan in these past few games in this series. He continues to obviously not get too much ice time. I think he had just about 7 minutes here tonight. But unlike in the end of the regular season when he was also not getting all too many minutes, he was playing terribly even in the few minutes he managed to get, but he's actually been quite reliable for the Sharks, honestly enough, and even in just the few minutes he's actually had. So it's been rather impressive, and I don't feel as nervous if the Sharks have to give him maybe even just a couple more minutes going into the next game. Maybe not the next game, but maybe if the Sharks make it to the third round, Games 1 and Games 2 of all that, if they need to give some of their higher ice time players a break, I don't actually feel as uncomfortable as I did maybe at the end of the regular season giving Ryan a couple more minutes, because he has actually been quite solid, no massive mistakes, and so the 7 minutes he does get are quite important still, and he's been doing a good job in those few minutes he has managed to be given. Finally, I will talk about the penalty kill. Of course, last game I mentioned the power play as that has been somewhat failing the Sharks throughout most of this series. Tonight it did come up big with that game-tying goal late in the second period, but the penalty kill has been very, very good job preventing the Sharks from being run over by the Avalanche, because while the Sharks power play is floundering, the Avalanche power play hasn't been doing that much better, thankfully, thanks in part to that Sharks penalty kill. I mean, the Avalanche have one of the best first power play units in the league, sporting Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Gabriel Landeskog, Tyson Barrie, and Colin Wilson is sort of just there, but he's decent as well, sort of like how Kevin Labanc is there. They're good on the power play, you could say. And so the fact that the Sharks have been able to keep that unit off the board almost every single time, barring the first game Colin Wilson and the fourth game Colin Wilson, is a testament to how strong this penalty kill has been for the Sharks. It was a worry at times coming down the final stretch of the regular season, actually more than the final stretch in the regular season. It was actually quite struggling. It was second place in the league for a long time, but it really fell off there. Maybe past the halfway point even, maybe closer to the final quarter. But it has been a lot better, specifically in this round. It didn't start off too well against the Golden Knights, but to be fair, Martin Jones didn't start off too well against the Golden Knights, and he is a big part of the penalty kill. So the special teams for the Sharks, or at least this half of the special teams for the Sharks, has been solid, and hopefully the power play with this goal here tonight can maybe get the confidence to sort of make an unstoppable special teams machine that will allow the Sharks to close out this series and move on to the third round to face off against the Stars or the Blues, depending on who wins tomorrow, or that series could technically go 7 as well. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Monday. They will be back in Denver, where they are 1-1 thus far in this series. They did win a game in Denver, their one game in Denver in the regular season, if I'm not mistaken. So the Sharks actually have a winning record in the Pepsi Center this season, so it's certainly not a bad sign for the Sharks, but the Avalanche are obviously going to push hard. We saw how frustrated Nathan MacKinnon became, and that should only make him a lot better going into the next game. So the Sharks will have to be even more on their toes to try and shut down that top line, which, by the way, was together again to start this game. So it seems as though Bednar has caught up with the fact that these are his 3 best players and they should be playing on the same line. But if the Sharks manage to get the win, maybe they can get a couple of days off, hoping that maybe the Blue Jackets-Bruins series or the Blue Star series goes 7, and finally the Sharks could have a few days of rest before the next round. Class dismissed.